not anymore, so I'll explain. This. Just take my pants off and we can get started. This show will address the question of how a skinny kid from Georgia got to be the first clown to ever play Broadway. It's entitled How I Got to Be Who I'm Pretending to Be. I should start by telling you that I really never wanted to be an actor. I always wanted to be a herpetologist. That was in the days before they had invented herpes. A herpetologist is someone who studies the reptiles and amphibians. And my specialty was snakes. I think I was afraid of them. It was the main reason that I got interested in them. But when I was in grammar school, I remember that we always had 40 or 50 snakes around the house. There were 3 of us. I mean, there were 3 of us people, 3 friends who had a snake club. And we spent most of our time in the creeks around North Georgia, catching snakes. Then we expanded and started ordering snakes from Florida. I remember one time, oops, I'm leaking. That's all right, I'll fix it. The delivery man came from Florida, it was UPS, and he had this box. And he came to the door, my dad answered, and the guy was standing there with this box and said, "Fragile on it." He said, I think you better put that down. The guy said, no, just sign right here. He said, "I think you better put that down before I tell you what's in it." The guy said, "Just sign right here." He said, "Please put it down." The guy put it down. He said, "That's full of snakes, live snakes." The guy backed up down the stairs and held the pad out for my dad to sign. Well, we had assumed that the snakes would be in little kind of containers. Well, they were just kind of loose. And when we opened the box, they made a break for it. Anyhow, I spent my youthful years chasing around the creeks and really planning to be a scientist. It was the thing that was most important to me. I don't think I ever saw a play until I got to college, and I'll tell you about that. One thing that was remarkable was that I won the state science fair. I had been reading, and I found out that there was a histamine is a byproduct of cell injury. Do you want to hear this? You're here, you might as well.
Hands back on.
So I found out that histamine was a byproduct of cell injury. Now something that was always fascinating to me was the fact that salamanders could regenerate their tails after they've been cut off, generally by crayfish, who are kind of like little lobsters, excuse me. And, excuse me just a second. Oh, jeez. That always helps. I'll skip a little bit of that story and tell you something else. You may have seen quoting me that I really owed a great debt to my 2 teachers, Jacques Lecoq, who taught me everything I know, and Carlo Rizzoni Clementi, who taught me the rest. How many of you know Carlo? And you'll understand when I say that he gives new meaning to the Italian race. He's a rapid individual. Covers a lot of territory. What he always said to me was, "Avner, it doesn't matter what you know. It's not interesting what you know, it's what you don't know." that's interesting. It's the act of discovery on stage. So this show will have a lot of discovery. I probably know as little about what's going to happen as you do. I feel a little like Alexander Haig. I'm in charge, but I don't know what's going on. So we'll find out a little more about discovery later. Anyhow, these salamanders are our favorite delicacy of crayfish. And crayfish will often grab them by whatever they can get a hold of, which is usually the tail sticking out, and the tail just comes off. And they go and grow another one. And in fact, they will regenerate their limbs at an earlier age. Well, people don't do this. And I was interested in finding out why they didn't, we don't. So I knew this about histamine, which is the same thing, the opposite of antihistamine, that you take for a cold. So it was very simple. I took 3 groups of salamanders and cut off their tails. Well, that was a problem. See, I like animals a lot. I can't stand to cause them pain. So I really hate putting worms on hooks, because you can tell that they really hate it. I get the creeps thinking about it. So I had to cut the tails off these salamanders, and I knew from experience they didn't. Somehow, when crayfish grab them, they come off very easily, but when I grabbed them, they just stayed there. And I couldn't just pull them off, so I decided to amputate them with a scalpel. But that kind of gave me the creeps too, so then I decided that I would anesthetize them with ether. So I got this cotton and made a kind of a little mask for them, and I hold them. And drip ether on it, because you don't want to do too much. You can see that. They won't grow back. But the problem is, the ether gets into the air, and you breathe it. So after 2 or 3, that's kind of about half looped with this salamander that was about half looped. We were trying to coordinate getting his tail cut off. Anyhow, I finally got them cut off and divided them into 3 groups. And I left one group alone. They were probably the happiest. Relatively speaking to the other 2 groups. And then I injected the stump of the tail of one group with an antihistamine, and I injected the stump of the tail of the 3rd group with histamine. And the theory would be that the antihistamine group would regenerate slower, the histamine group would regenerate faster, and the middle group would be in the middle. And that's just what happened. And that's science. I won an award for that. So I thought, well, I should stick with this. It's kind of like the one and only time I went to the horse races. We got there, picked up the little, I guess it's a racing form, isn't it? And we picked a horse, and it won. And we thought, God, this is easy. How long have they been giving money away like this? We'd have come out a lot better if we had won the first race. So I was determined to be a scientist. At the same time, these were kind of elements. I think the scientific training really helped a lot ultimately in my stage work. Another element that played heavily was the fact that I was a sort of an athlete. When I played soccer, they said I looked like Ichabod Crane. He's the guy that was being chased by the Headless Horseman. I guess I looked like I was being chased by the Headless Horseman. I was a high jumper, I was a gymnast, and a diver, which I did all poorly, but I should say inaccurately, but effectively. They did have one trick named after me. I wasn't very strong then. I had really kind of toothpick arms. Do you know what a back handspring is? If not, I'll tell you. You start here, jump backwards, which I can't do right now, land on your hands and land on your feet. Well, my arms were very strong. So I used to do one of those that ended up in a headstand. It was called an Eisenberg drop. And was only a minor deduction from your score. So anyhow, I got through high school somehow. I think one of the problems with high school also was that the humanities were taught in a very straight-ahead manner. This is what this poem means, this is what that poem means. And the sciences were the place that we were encouraged to be creative, the place that we were encouraged to be crazy. I remember the occasion with thermite. We read about this in chemistry class, and we were encouraged to try things. Now, I don't remember all the details. If there's a chemist here, maybe you can help me out with this. But basically, there's a series of elements. And if you take one from the top, it will replace one from the bottom. And the farther apart they get, the more violent the reaction. So we took one from up here and one from about here, which is the usual thermite. And what thermite is something they developed during the war for melting through tanks. They made these kind of grenades out of it. They put it on top and would just melt a hole in it. Well, we didn't have this one in the middle. We had this one down here. So we prepared ourselves. We got a tub of sand and took 2 crucibles. Now, crucibles are things that are intended to go in very, very hot ovens. They're indestructible. We did find out that they are meltable, however. And we put them in the sand, and we put this thermite there. And then we had some other kind of explosive thing that we used to set it off. I don't remember what that was. What I do remember is getting knocked down and being all kind of black from the soot. There was a hole in the ceiling, and an entire wing of my high school was filled with this thick green smoke. They didn't encourage us quite so much after that. So anyhow, I somehow graduated from high school and went off to college as an honors chemistry and biology major with the idea of being something, a herpetologist, probably maybe a veterinarian or a people doctor if none of that worked out. And, it's very funny to be standing here talking to everyone. I usually do a silent show. It's all silent. I remember once on a tour that I did with a whole bunch of people, actually the Chautauqua, if you know about it, people that are, a lot of people from this festival. I remember at the end we were giving testimonials and I stood up and said, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, and I sat down. This show was somewhat inspired by Mark Twain, who used to do autobiographical monologues. And there's a story about Mark Twain that goes around Maine now that I'll try to do it in a Maine accent. It's far enough away that I probably won't get caught. Mark Twain came to the Grange Hall to give a lecture, and no one laughed, and this troubled him some. So after it was over, he went out into the yard to see if he could eavesdrop and find out what the matter was. You see, he was a very funny fellow. It bothered him some. Fred and Irma came out. Fred said to Irma, "That was the funniest thing I believe I have ever heard." She said, "Yes, 'twas. 'Twas all I could do to keep from laughing." We have a lot of lobsters where I live. I live on a little island in Maine, and we're surrounded by them. And I heard about an old grandmother from Maine who came to San Francisco to visit her grandchildren. And they thought she might be getting homesick, and they said, "Grandma, we're going to take you out for lobster." She said, "Oh, I don't think I want any." They said, "Why not?" She said, "I wouldn't trust it this far from the ocean." So anyhow, I got to college. I had the choice between Northwestern, which is in Chicago, Duke, which is in North Carolina, and Tulane, which is in Louisiana. I chose Tulane because it was warmer. That's really the reason. So I went there, as an honors chemistry and biology major. I got into a fraternity and was in Navy ROTC, which seemed a legitimate way of getting out of the draft, at least for a while. I think it was the chemistry that really did me in. We had an experiment to do where we had a pipette. A pipette is a long, thin tube with a little skinny end on it, and it has lines on it. And we're doing some kind of experiment. I didn't realize that you had to stop at the bottom line. You had to, I blew the whole thing out. And there's somewhere between a small and a medium-sized drop of fluid left in the bottom of the pipette. God, excuse me. Gets to be a problem. Excuse me. If you like that, you're going to love this. I'll try 3. This is an illustrated autobiographical monologue. It will be illustrated with things from the Avner the Eccentric show that don't hurt. Where was I? Oh, chemistry. So, anyhow, I didn't stop at the bottom line, and I blew this extra drop in. It was a titration experiment, I remember now. And it screwed the whole thing up. So what I had to do was take 100 loads in a pipette just from the bottom line, blow them out into a container and weigh them on this incredible kind of electronic balance, and then take the average of all those and then change all the results of all, and that was it. That did it for me. I remember it was on a Friday night about 11 o'clock, and I took my test tube tray of things, and I walked up to the instructor and I said, I don't think I'll be needing these anymore, and I dropped them in the trash can and walked out. And within 2 weeks, had 105 temperature, and they found me in my room dressed in all of my Navy ROTC clothes singing. I was never very good at ROTC, and I can't sing. So I developed a case of psychosomatic mononucleosis. I had all the symptoms, but none of the goodies. So I got to go home from college. And I think it was the nicest thing that ever happened, because I got out of ROTC, which was not a good way of staying out of the draft. There's only one good way of staying out, and that's don't go. And I got out of the fraternity, which was also pretty silly, unless you like food fights. And I got out of chemistry. I think the thing that really got me out of chemistry, and out of the sciences really, excuse me, was a realization that if I were to do professional science, I was going to have to be someone else's lab assistant for at least 10 years before I got to do any of the kind of original research that I might be interested in. So I went and stayed home for 6 months, came back to school, a changed man. And Oh, you just got here? Instant replay. So that was nice getting out of that. I came back thinking I wanted to be a rabbi. And actually worked teaching Israeli folk dance, which I got good at somehow along the way. I looked like Ichabod Crane doing it, but I could teach it. And taught Hebrew school, which was another thing that I had learned as a kid. So I kind of meandered through the humanities. I remember my first major was sociology. I thought that would be useful and helpful and altruistic. That's a goofy thing to study. I got a D in that course. It was the only course I ever got a D in. It was because I made the mistake of becoming friends with the professor. He said, well, you can do much better than that. I'd written a good paper, but anyhow, that was enough for sociology. Then I tried philosophy for a while, and that was pretty useless. And then the best thing that ever happened to me, I guess we could call this talk the effects of rain on theatrical careers, because it rained one day, and I had just bought a whole stack of books, and I was taking them home, and we had this huge thunderstorm, and I ducked into the theater building, and things haven't been the same since. They were having auditions for a play. It was called Machiavelli and the Mandrake. It's an updated version of the Mandragora by Machiavelli. This one was written by Stanley Harrison. And I ran into a friend. He convinced me that I should audition. He didn't get a part, but I did. I had a tiny little part. I didn't even get to go on stage. I sat in the audience and I heckled. But it was all planned. It never even sounded like heckling, and I had makeup on, and people would stare at me. I was in theater. I had to wear a suit for that. I owned one in those days. When I was on Broadway, I had an interview, and they said, well, you've gotten pretty famous now. How's it changed your lifestyle? And I said, well, it hasn't changed it a bit. And I said, well, it has, actually. I'm thinking of buying a suit. That was 2 years ago. I haven't got one yet. My brother-in-law and I are thinking of buying one, though. We'll be in trouble if anybody in our family gets married, though. One of us will wear the pants. So I got into theater, and it fascinated me. What fascinated me the most was that it was something you could do at full level, right away, from the very beginning. When you stepped on stage, you were at a professional level, at least in your relationship with the audience. And this was something that was not available in any of the other disciplines. They treated you like a student. And in the theater, they impressed on you that you were really a professional from the very first level. So I got really interested in theater. Well, that didn't last so long. And then I kind of went through a progression from theater, because I found out I not only couldn't sing, and I danced funny, I couldn't act. So I got interested in mime, and I learned all that mime crap. You know how they do this these days. I hope I can do it in these shoes. That's just street kids taking a mime walk and finding a way to make it entertaining. I tell students, especially at mime festivals, your first job is to make the audience love you. Make them love you, and you can do anything, even mime. You can even tell them about high school. So I got interested in theater and was in this play, which figured in my career later very heavily, and I'll tell you about that later. Two things happened here. The reason I got interested in mime is that a fellow named Johnny Simons, now this was in 1967, when there were not very many street performers. Was anyone performing here in the streets then? I know on the East Coast there were no street performers. There was one guy who claimed he was a Juilliard student who used to play out on Broadway in New York at intermission of Broadway shows. But he got picked up in a limousine at the end of his show. Where's that laugh coming from? Is there someone down there? So there weren't any street performers in these days. There weren't any sort of role models. I remember in New Orleans there were 2 street performers. There were some really young black kids who tap danced. Well, that was out. And there was a Haitian guy who was a fire eater. That had interest, which I pursued later. But Johnny Simons was a mime, one of the few mimes in the country at that time, and he did a commedia dell'arte version of Pinocchio. And I was in it, and got interested in mime through that. At the same time, my best friend came to visit us in New Orleans. We blew all our money right away, and we're trying to figure out what to do. So we decided that we would go out and perform in the street, on Bourbon Street. Now, we decided we'd juggle, because that was all we could do. And we didn't even do that well. Now, if you know anything about juggling now, most juggling clubs are made out of plastic. They're very lightweight, they don't really hurt, they're easily available. We had 2-pound solid maple Indian clubs. And we only had 2 of them. And we had some fruit. So we did an act. This was our first act. This was in New Orleans, 1967. This is what we got busted for. One of us would juggle 2 of these 2-pound solid maple Indian clubs and 1 piece of fruit. And the other one talked and said things like, "We were born hungry and we'll probably die hungry, but it feels so good to fill up in between, so please help us out." The show had problems. But it attracted a huge crowd, which was one of the problems. So the police basically told us that they would arrest us if we didn't leave. Said they would charge us. We asked them what they were going to charge us with. They said inciting to riot. And begging without a license. I remember my big trick was 1 out of 3 times I could throw one of these 2-pound solid maple wooden clubs behind my back and catch it. I could throw it every time. I could only catch it 1 out of 3. So sometimes it took a while for the act to come to its sort of conclusion. So we had a little plaque with us, and we went to a bar to buy everybody a beer with the $2 or $3 we had earned. And, well, we had these suits on, funny suits, and makeup. So we walked into a bar and said, "We'd like a beer." And they said, "What are you guys doing?" And we said, "Well, we do a show." They said, "Well, do a show for us." So they opened up a place in the middle, they turned on the lights, and we actually did a show. We did some of Marceau. We did, there was a group called Grapes and Allen. We did a couple of their routines. We were in a sort of imitative period. So we improvised this show. Of course, we had our trick. Luckily, they hadn't seen Marceau or Grapes and Allen, so they thought it was really good stuff. And I remember it was later when I grew my first beard. Actually, it was the next year when I came back to school. I was growing a beard for Oedipus Rex. And I remember I called home. My dad answered the phone, and I said, "Hi." He said, "Who's this?" I said, "It's Avner." He said, "Oh, geez, I didn't recognize you with your beard." So I went home to Atlanta after this first year, and word had gotten around that I had become a performer and was working on the streets. And so a cousin of mine asked me if I would do a show for some women's organization, a fundraiser. So in the meantime, a couple of other things had happened. I decided to take stage movement classes, but they didn't have them, so they put me in ballet. And I looked like a pair of pliers with a Band-Aid on it. I was the only man in the Sophie Newcomb ballet department. But I tried. Not bad. So when I came back to Atlanta, a couple of things happened. Number one, I went and auditioned for the Nutcracker. I've had guts in those days. And I got in. They weren't discriminating. So, oh, little cute kids are back. We'll get to them later. I got in doing... Maybe I shouldn't wait till later. What's your name?
Sean.
How do you know? He's going to be one of those guys. Business card? No, serious. I'll show you something that I do with a business card. I'll make a little present for Sean. You just wait there, okay? Thanks. Oh, that's a nice one. Sean gets a free meal at... Can you all see this? Look at this, Sean. You see all the words on that side? See, they're on this side, too. Yeah, see, they're on both sides. And then we keep this side free to write messages on, and that one too. You know what the words are? They're back on these two sides. You know how I did that? See this stuff right here? It comes up, and then we use it again. Right here. Here, first. Oh, I missed it. We'll pass this around so you can all see it. It's worth it. I promise you, you'll all go, wow, when you see it. You nervous?
No.
I am. Can I ask a personal question?
No.
I can't.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have holes in your underwear?
No.
How do you get your leg? This was taught to me by a man named Ken Fight, who many of you may know or have known. Ken's no longer with us, but he's had a big influence on a lot of us. This guy came up to me one time at a Renaissance fair and said, "Do you have a business card?" Sort of like I did there. He did this for me. We got to be very good friends after that. And Ken eventually taught me how to make these. It's a unicorn, or a unigoat, as the popular theory has it. Get nervous?
No.
Good. So, it's all done. What time did we start this? Yes. You guys gonna